Hello, my name is Charlie Olson, and here is my presentation for Foundations of the West History on Bacon's Rebellion. Bacon's Rebellion was America's first major colonial uprising. The rebellion took place in the Virginia colony in 1676, while the colony was still owned, obviously, by England. Nathaniel Bacon emerged as the leader of the disgruntled settlers. The conflict was directed against Governor William Berkeley's administration. Bacon's rebellion tested the strength of colonial authority for the first time. Here's an introduction to Bacon's Rebellion. Bacon's Rebellion was a major uprising in colonial Virginia. The rebellion also reflected anger against the elite political leadership, as the classes were very divided. Anger fueled among the poorer people. It involved conflict with Native American tribes on the frontier. Poor settlers and freed indentured servants played leading roles, which kind of steps out of the norms of them being submissive to their masters. The rebellion had a lasting impacts on colonial society and government. Background: Virginia in the 1600s. Virginia's economy was heavily dependent on tobacco farming, of all things. Wealthy planters controlled political and economic life. Poor settlers moved westward, encroaching on Native American lands. Rising tensions developed between frontier settlers and native groups. Ordinary colonists had very little voice in colonial government, as the only people in position to vote were land-owning white males. Causes of the rebellion: frequent Native American raids endangered frontier settlements. Settlers demanded protection and military action from the government. Governor Berkeley refused to sanction widespread attacks on tribes. Many settlers felt betrayed by their government's inaction. Access to Western lands became a growing point of conflict. So Native Americans were coming after the frontier settlements. They weren't just folding over and getting, taken over by the colonists. They showed some fight, and settlers wanted protection from the military. Cause of the Rebellion Part 2. Governor Berkeley's administration favored wealthy elites over common settlers, as it was in his best interest to keep getting reelected and have more money. High taxes placed a heavy burden on poor farmers and laborers. Falling tobacco prices caused economic hardship throughout the colony. Political corruption in Jamestown increased resentment among settlers. And the growing class resentment fueled the desire for rebellion. And as that gap between the income grew, the tensions grew as well. And you had indentured servants, so people working for no pay. They still get mutually agreed upon terms, but they were still angry on the state of their environment. Nathaniel Bacon was a wealthy but politically frustrated newcomer to Virginia, which is kind of counterintuitive, as he led this movement as a wealthy man, and it was a, poor versus wealthy movement. He was denied a military commission by Governor Berkeley. Bacon positioned himself as a champion of the frontier for settlers' grievances. His personal ambition combined with widespread anger to spark rebellion. Bacon's leadership gave the movement momentum and legitimacy, as if this movement was only by poor peasants, it would be hard to gain the traction that it did, because it wouldn't have the funding and it wouldn't have the credibility that it would have if it had people that were wealthy supporting it, as most movements are. If you do not have credible people or funding or money, it's hard for that movement to have any impact on government legitimacy or anything of that sort. So that's why Nathaniel Bacon was, I guess, the man for the job. Some major events of the rebellion. Bacon organized an unauthorized militia to defend the frontier. His forces attacked both hostile and peaceful native tribes indiscriminately. Governor Berkeley declared Bacon a rebel and an outlaw. Bacon's army marched on Jamestown to confront the colonial government. On September 19th, 1676, Bacon's forces burned Jamestown to the ground. So this is an example of, obviously, inciting change with violence. Bacon formed a militia, marched to the capital, and essentially burned Jamestown to the ground. And Bacon's death and collapse. Nathaniel Bacon died suddenly of dysentery in October of 1676. His death left the rebellion leaderless and weakened. Without strong leadership, the rebel forces quickly lost cohesion. Governor Berkeley was able to reassert control over Virginia. Most remaining rebels either surrendered or were captured, which kind of goes back to how they needed Nathaniel Bacon to lead, because he was wealthy, he was prominent, he was a credible figure, and he was their leader. And it just shows that with him dying suddenly, the rebellion lost its momentum, it lost its movement, and Governor Berkeley was quickly able to reassert control over Virginia and got things back in the order that they were before the rebellion. With government power. The immediate aftermath, Governor Berkeley executed 23 rebel leaders as punishment. Executed meaning he killed them. Harsh reprisals created fear among the remaining settlers. King Charles II criticized Berkeley's excessive brutality, King Charles being the King of England. The rebellion revealed the fragile balance of colonial authority. Jamestown, the colonial capital, was left very heavily damaged as it was burned by the rebellion. The long-term effects of the Bacon Rebellion. After the rebellion, Virginia's elite shifted toward greater reliance on African slavery. Planters viewed indentured servants as potential threat to stability, because those were people that rose up in this first instance. Racial divisions became even more deeply entrenched in colonial society as the hatred for the classes grew. British authorities imposed tighter control over colonial governments, and colonial leaders learned to fear the political power of the lower class. So they did have some positive effect, and it did create them, maybe not as big of a voice, but they were feared, and they weren't viewed as just submissive rollovers, which allowed for them to get more respect in government. Why Bacon's Rebellion matters. Bacon's Rebellion was the first large-scale challenge to colonial rule, the first one to happen in the New World. It exposed the dangers of unchecked social and economic inequality. Colonial governments became more cautious and repressive after the rebellion to prevent this from happening again. Labor systems permanently shifted away from indentured servitude. The rebellion foreshadowed ideas of resistance that would later fuel the American Revolution, where we separated from our colonizers. Conclusion: Bacon's rebellion highlighted conflicts over land, class, and government. The uprising led to major changes in Virginia's labor and political systems. Deep division in colonial society became harder to ignore after 1676. The event served as an early example of resistance to oppressive leadership. Some examples of that we see today would be the Occupy Wall Street movement, the Watts riots in Los Angeles, and the Bonus Army March, where soldiers wanted more pay. And here are my sources, and that's all. Thank you.